So I'd like to introduce Danee Kenyon. She goes by the name Danee. She graduated magna cum laude from UCSD last year in aerospace engineering. She is an electromechanical engineer at Northrop Grumman, where she interned for a year and a half while still a student at UCSD. So I'm sure she'll have a lot to say about the importance of internships while you're a student. During that internship, she designed test fixtures for military radio jamming systems. She performed structural analysis and provided drafting support. Also, while as a student at UCSD, she was a Gordon Scholar for Engineering Leadership. She served as a tutor for MAE-7, and she was structural systems designer and team flyer for the UCSD microgravity team. And she was on the team with Sam Avery, who was one of our speakers in this series last year. Their microgravity project was a fiber-supported droplet combustion test conducted in microgravity on a zero-G aircraft. So who has heard of a zero-G aircraft? Okay, and who has not? It's okay, don't be shy. I didn't hear about it until maybe a few years ago. So a zero-G aircraft is an aircraft that, I think it's a DC-130 or
DC-9, I think, or a C-9.
So it's an aircraft that's been refitted. They take out all the seats, and then they make it an environment where you can go into microgravity. It'll go up really high, it'll go on parabolas, so it'll go up really steep. So then you have lots of G's, but then it'll go down, and you're in free fall. And that's when you have, I think, maybe 30 seconds of microgravity.
Or so, yeah.
Sorry?
Or so.
Yeah, or so.
About.
And it goes on multiple parabolas. And this is run out of Johnson Space Center in Texas. Are you going to be talking about that today?
I will touch on it, yeah.
That would be great. Yeah. So she did that while she was a student. And I first met Danee when I met her at Northrop Grumman this last summer when she was mentoring some students on an Arduino competition. And these were students that this project was supported by Space Grant, and Northrop Grumman added so much more support in the form of mentors and scholarships. So I met her there, and she volunteered to come back to UCSD and meet with some of our summer students, and then later to come here and talk with you all. And she arranged a tour for us at Northrop Grumman. And I don't know, maybe she can do that again. So she's been very helpful. She's very eager to help people in engineering to succeed both in their academics as well as in their lives. So without further ado, I give you Danee Kenyon.
All right. Thank you very much, Daseen. That was a really nice introduction. Okay, so hi guys. Per the flyer that I'm sure a lot of you saw, my topic today is going to be for success strategies in engineering and beyond into the workplace. So before we get started, I know I already asked a couple people who got here a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to get an idea of who's in the audience today. So go ahead and raise your hands if it applies. How many of you are first years? All right, a lot of them. Second years? Okay, any third years? One. Fourth years? One at the very back there. Okay, so we've got a lot of lower classmen, that helps. And then for majors, it was, I think I had aerospace all in the front row, but any others hanging out in the back? Okay, there you go. Electrical? All right, computer? One. Chemical? Okay, what other ones are there? Structural? There we go. Okay, I think that's most of them. Good, so we have a pretty wide spread. So I think this talk is going to be pretty general because it's kind of aimed at a skill set that's valuable, across majors, across years, and so it can kind of apply to whatever place you're at in time. So don't worry if this isn't going to be, so don't worry about it only applying to juniors or seniors or something like that. So kind of an idea of what I'm going to go over today. It's mostly going to be sort of tools in your toolkit. It's more aimed at the soft skills that you want to develop in terms of time management and self-management to help you succeed in engineering. So as you can see, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and then go even more in depth later in the presentation. So I'll be doing a lot of talking about myself. But feel free to raise your hands if you have questions. If you want to wait till the very end, there'll also be a question session at that time. But again, just raise your hand, stop me. If I start contradicting myself, let me know. Okay, and I'm also going to bridge over and talk about how these things apply in the workplace, and again, just in general, some strategies to help you with time management. Excuse me. So, again, introducing myself a little bit, I think Tasseen's already covered most of this. I did graduate last year in aerospace engineering. This is my class picture. I'm right in the front, one of eight or so girls, I think. This was my entire graduating class. So right now I am working at Northrop Grumman as an electromechanical engineer, and my day job is mostly working on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. So I started winter quarter of my junior year back in 2013, and so I interned with them, as Tasseen said, about a year and a half before I was brought on full-time after my senior year graduation. So again, F-35, but what that really breaks down to is that I am an electromechanical engineer. And what that means is that I work mostly on radio and military jamming systems. So unfortunately, it's not as cool as looking at an entire aircraft, but we do work on a lot of the mission critical systems for the F-35, mainly the avionics package, communications, navigation, instrumentation, any kind of waveforms that it puts out generally is what we work on at my site. And so how that breaks down on the day-to-day is I do a lot of drafting, a lot of CAD, a lot of project data management. I do a lot of engineering change orders and engineering change requests, which is a whole lot of engineering technical paperwork. I do a lot of designing of test fixtures and thermal support systems, mostly aimed at supporting electronic systems that eventually become flight hardware. So Tasseen also touched on this. This is probably what I consider the coolest thing that I did while I was an undergrad here at UCSD, and that was going on the Microgravity University Research Team. So the way that program works is a whole bunch of universities submit research proposals to NASA for experiments to be performed in microgravity. So they select maybe 10 or 15 schools from across the entire US. They give them a little bit of funding, not very much, and then you build your own test fixture, you build all of your own equipment, and then they fly you out to Houston to the Johnson Space Center, and then as Tasseen was saying, you get to go on that zero-gravity parabolic aircraft. And if you're me, you got very, very sick because it is completely nauseating. But it's actually very intense. But it was a whole lot of fun and definitely one of the most valuable experiences I had here as an undergrad. So, all right, jumping straight in. So this is what I consider some of the basic tools of the trade for life management. And it's three pretty small items. It's a little easy to digest. And I break it down into focusing, prioritization, and then just generally time management. And why are these skills important? It's because, well, if you want to be that type A student who does absolutely everything while you're an undergrad, you're working full-time, you're taking a whole bunch of classes, you're on a bunch of project teams, and if you plan on sleeping at some point, you definitely need to start taking charge of what you're doing and when to be able to manage all these skills. And even beyond that, these are skills that are super valuable in the workplace. So developing them now as an undergrad is definitely the best time to start working on these skills and developing them. So, jumping right in, the very first one is pretty basic and straightforward. Just keeping your eye on the ball and focused on what you need to do. And this is essentially just writing things down. Know what you need to do, know when you need to do it. I don't care if you're writing it down in a notebook, if you're writing it down on your phone, if you're carrying a voice recorder around and leaving yourself memos and pretending it's your phone or something. I don't care. Just have one consolidated place where you have all of your notes written down, where you know everything that you need to do is. Because before you can start prioritizing and managing and doing all of these tasks, you need to have one consistent place where everything is written down or recorded or in some way, kept track of, so that you can start applying all of these other strategies. So, number one, write it down. So next is prioritizing. And this can seem kind of straightforward at first because, of course, you have to do your homework, you have to go to work. But once you start breaking it down and your time availability gets smaller and smaller and smaller, it can be hard to just sit down and evaluate, okay, which class's homework is more important that I do right now? How much time do I really have? What do I want to get done versus what do I need to get done? And making those kinds of judgment calls takes practice, but there are some tricks to it to help yourself figure out what your priorities need to be. So essentially the way that helps me view it is to treat your time as a resource. And so, exactly like money. So imagine you have $100 to spend every day. That's it. That is the limit of how much you can get done in that day. You have $100 worth of time. So in that time, you could do a whole bunch of $5 tasks, like cooking a meal, making a snack, picking up your laundry off the floor. Or you can do more time-expensive tasks, like going to class, going to work, things that take up a lot more of your time. But the limiting factor is you only have so much time in a day to get these things done. So you have the option of either getting 20 $5 tasks done, or you can do two $50 tasks or one $80 task. So maybe I did one class's worth of homework and I did my laundry. And that's it. That's all I got done in a day. But it still gives you an evaluation of what kind of progress you made and what the important things are that you needed to get done. So another kind of consideration that goes into it is these dollar values aren't assigned purely based on how much time something takes. They're also valued on the value of the task that needs to be done, right? So this kind of goes towards how much willpower it takes to do things. So maybe cooking is really fun for you. So it's really simple. You do it fast, you enjoy it. It's a $5 task. You could cook 20 times a day and still have a good time. But if you're like me, I personally hate doing my laundry. And so while that might be a $10 task for some people, that's like $30, $40 for me. It's going to take a whole lot of belly aching. I'm going to try and put off doing it for an hour before I actually start. So it just depends on what your preferences are, and that comes down to knowing yourself. And that sometimes is also an evaluation you make for classes, right? Because getting up in time for that 8 a.m. class is quite a bit harder than getting up in time for that 1 p.m. class. And so maybe that's all you were able to get to that day. But you did make it to class, so extra points there. So moving forward into kind of the more important one, I suppose, is time management. So once you have a list of everything that you know that you need to do, and you've kind of ranked it in terms of how important those tasks are, and you have a feeling for what you need to get done, it comes down to time management, and this is probably the most important skill on here. And so there's a lot of generic advice on time management out here. You probably heard a lot of this in high school, and it's just buying a planner, using a self-management app on your phone, using a Google Calendar, and a lot of that is super handy. I highly recommend it, but it's kind of very generic advice, and it can be hard to jump in and say, okay, how do I start using a calendar? What's an effective strategy to apply to calendaring to make sure that I get everything done? And so I want to present a method that I've used that's also come recommended to me that sort of helps you break up the calendar so that you can actually actively manage your time instead of just passively tracking everything that you have to do in one place. So let's see. Yep, and so that specific method that I was talking about is called time blocking. Now I used this strategy for most of my undergraduate career. I didn't actually have a name for it until I started working at Northrop Grumman, but once you started prioritizing, it actually falls in really well with this strategy. And so the idea behind it is that you start doing block scheduling. Sorry, I know I tend to talk kind of fast. Is everybody keeping up, kind of? You doing okay? Okay. So the idea behind block scheduling is you sit down and you look at a calendar that has your Sunday through Saturday detailed on it, and you make an evaluation of everything that you have going on in that week. And you assign specific blocks of time so that you know what you're doing at specific times during the week. So you make blocks for your classes, you make blocks of time for doing your homework, you make blocks of time for when you go to the gym or for when you work every week. And this gives you a very specific picture of where you're available and where you're not available every week. And so the way you can fill in those blocks kind of depends on what your priorities are. Again, to drop that word again. So, excuse me, it's really dry in here. So to begin, the way I fill in my blocks tends to be starting with my classes, because those don't move around. They're going to be the same all the time. You know when you're supposed to be in class, so you always go straight for that. I'm going to be in class for these 8 hours every week, so that time may or may not be available to me. Then I usually put in when my homework weekly due dates are. Like, I always know that fluids homework is due on Tuesdays, so I just put that on there because I know that's going to dictate in some way what my schedule looks like. So having those important dates is really handy to have as a reference week to week. So next, because I worked for most of undergrad, I would assign my working time. And that was because, I had to be in the office during specific hours, or my schedule was determined for me. So I needed to have very specific availabilities. Whereas homework is a lot more flexible. I can do that at home, I can do that in a coffee shop, I can do that during class. Homework moves around a whole lot, but work is working time. And so it needs time to be able to travel there, and it gets kind of a higher rating based on that. And then, other things like going to the gym. I know if I don't schedule it, I usually don't go. Project teams. If you're on a team like the Microgravity Club or the Rocket Club or AIAA or any of the good clubs on campus, you'll probably have fixed project times where they have project meetings to work on those, so you'll want to have those on your calendar. And then, of course, homework, socializing, and I know sleep is on there, but I don't know too many engineering students who do a lot of that, so it's at the bottom of the list. But again, this order is very much a personal choice based on what's important to you. So if you don't have a job, obviously working doesn't register anywhere on this radar. Maybe going to the gym is way more important than hanging out with your friends. Totally fine, just have that on your calendar somewhere. Or, maybe you don't like to do homework ever, so you just throw that right off the calendar right away. No judgment, either way. Figuring out what order you want to do these blocks in, totally up to you. This is just sort of an idea of how I would approach it when I was doing my classwork. And so the advantage of doing this type of method is that it gives you a very quick and easy picture of where you're spending your time, which can be very valuable. Because if you look at it and you go, oh, I probably spend about the same amount of time on all my classes, but you go, well, I gave myself 4 hours to do class 1, 4 hours to do class 2, 4 hours to do class 3, and I did not finish 2 of those class homeworks in that time. That tells you, okay, well, I barely need any time to do homework for my first class, but I need way more time to do all of my other homework. And so you can start to track where you're spending all your time and then start to optimize it. So you can tell this is very much an engineering approach to this. It's just completely analyzing the hell out of how you're spending all of your time. But again, it just turns into an allocating of resources problem. If I need to spend all of my time doing homework for one class, then I'm going to allocate all of my time to that one class. If I can get away with barely spending any time on another one, well, now I'm aware of it. And I can start scheduling that time into places where it will be most impactful and most meaningful for what I'm trying to get done. So again, time blocking. Very, very good strategy. And the way that you decide to do this, I personally am a very visual person, so I set up usually with just a piece of paper that has Sunday through Saturday on it, and then go through with highlighters and color the whole thing in. But it's just as easy to use a Google Calendar schedule to block all your time up, or the Triton Class Pre-Planner. It's actually that old tool that's on the website. It'll allow you to insert blocks of time for non-existent classes or stuff like that. So you can use that tool too if you like. It's not really as clean as Google, but it'll do the same thing, and it automatically imports all of your school and classes and everything. So that can be helpful. I've used that one from time to time as well. So, kind of going back to talking about myself a little bit more, I write everything, completely everything, down in a notebook, and I carry it with me everywhere. Again, because I'm a visual person, I like to write things down. So that's my focus part of it. That's how I keep track of everything that I have to do. I write everything down, everything. And so my schedule, well, this is kind of backdating to when I was in school, because things have moved around now that I'm working full-time, but that my priority order was class times, then homework, due dates, work scheduling, then project teams, then homework. Little switcheroo there. I usually did project teams before I would do homework because I thought the project team experience was more important than whether or not I finished the math problems, so I tended to go that direction. And also socializing. Again, socializing is sleep at the very end, but everybody has their choices. And so if I would overrun on time, again, using that analytical approach, I could go back and track back to find where that time is coming from, where I can earn it back, and how I can move my schedule around to make sure I can get to everything in time. So, kind of where this took me, I think Taseen already covered a little bit of it. I graduated in 4 years from Revelle. I didn't take any summer school, and I got honors, so my GPA didn't drop at all. I worked for most of undergrad, around 30 hours per week. I worked on campus, I worked for a professor, I had a full-time internship, which is something that I highly recommend for engineering students. It's definitely good to get out there and get that experience. I was always in at least one club, usually more than one, multiple project teams. I was a club officer. I also actually went out and socialized a couple nights per week. So if you're willing to commit to being this kind of a little bit anal but very useful scheduling setup, you can get a shocking amount of things done during the week. It is going to take some time and it is going to take some practice, but committing to it will definitely help you out in the long run. So, excuse me. The downside. So once you start getting really into it, oh, yes, question.
Yeah, just going back to your last slide.
Please.
So you graduated, you did the whole undergrad thing,
Mm-hmm.
you were working during that, and now immediately after you're working full time.
Mm-hmm.
How has that been, like, kind of being so young, but already like in the workforce full time?
So I think I definitely had an advantage in that I had already interned at that company at that location before I was hired on full time. So I had already developed a lot of the personal relationships and connections that you kind of need when you're first starting out and trying to find your way through a new company. So I think that was definitely valuable. However, there is a big difference between the type and amount of work they'll give an intern versus what they'll give an engineer. And probably the biggest part of that is the anticipated responsibility level, if that makes sense.
I was kind of
Oh, if I diverged a little bit there.
along the lines of like just kind of not having a break, like after college and like doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you regret anything? Do you like wish you had like more time to like kind of do stuff for yourself before doing full time?
Well, one big advantage. Well, I did take about a month off between graduating and actually starting work full time. That is one advantage, by the way. If you do get a full-time job offer, you can specify your start date a lot of the time. So, I graduated in early June. I didn't start till the end of July. I just took a whole bunch of time off. And honestly, by the time I was done, I was really ready to go back to work, because once you get used to a certain workload, it's weird just to sit around the house doing nothing and working on projects most of the time. So I definitely, I don't feel like I rushed through undergrad. I feel like I got as much done as I possibly can, but I also made a lot of friends. I met a lot of really cool people, mostly through all of these projects and different organizations that I worked for. So, no, I don't have any regrets.
And that's like one more question. So I hear a lot of times that companies are willing to, assist with like the financial side of getting a master's degree, working with them.
Yeah.
Is that the case with Northrop Grumman?
Very much so, yeah. So I think, and I've heard this from a lot of major aerospace companies as well. I can't speak to the other disciplines and industries, but most of them will give you anywhere from, I think pretty common is between like $5,000 and $15,000 a year to help with your master's degree, which depending on where you're going can go a long distance. If you're doing it online or if you're going to a public university, that'll get you pretty far. There are some companies that still do an unlimited cap for your master's degree. They are very rare now, unfortunately, but they are very strongly supportive of people going to grad school for the most part, mostly because they see it as, they get a free engineer with a master's degree, essentially. They don't have to go out and look for somebody that has a master's degree. They don't have to try somebody new. They already have a dedicated employee who's going to be working for them part-time, who eventually is going to be qualified as a master's student. So for them, there's a benefit there. Plus, they get some tax breaks for providing education funding, so that too. Okay. There any other questions, or? Okay. I'll move on. So again, what I was saying, and feel free to take a business card before you go. Okay, perfect. So the downside, I think, to doing this much scheduling and getting really intense with it is that it's very easy to get overwhelmed and overloading your plate and knowing when you're doing too much versus not enough versus when you can take more. And so a big part of this, I think, is actually having de-stressing be a part of your schedule. Actually knowing what calms you down, knowing what you enjoy, knowing what allows you to relax for a few minutes, and actually adding that into your schedule as well. And actually scheduling your time to sit down and relax and do nothing. And so for me, the way I always got around getting too overwhelmed with my schedule is I always had one activity that I could completely bail on all of my responsibilities for. And so that gave me enough freedom and enjoyment of my schedule that it kept me from getting too overwhelmed all the time. And that for me was taking like rep classes or doing dance classes and stuff like that, because I had a lot of friends who did it. So every time I went out, it was exercise, it was seeing friends, it was a lot of socializing. And so even if I was halfway through a paper, had a whole bunch of homework due the next day, I would just gone. I knew I needed to go out and do something that wasn't engineering for a little while. And having that type of activity in your schedule can be huge, especially once you get into your later classes and homework starts taking more and more and more of your day. So, moving forward, I want to kind of bridge the gap between how these skills apply to undergrad as well as how they move forward into the workplace. So again, that's why these skills are important. And I guess jumping ahead to my last bullet, school is essentially a staging ground for your career. The soft skills that you learn now are the exact same skills you're going to use once you're in the workplace. I mean, the technical skills, certainly, but there's a lot of other soft and implicit skills that are involved in engineering that in general aren't explicitly taught in school that tend to come in handy a lot later. So I mentioned this earlier, I actually learned the name time blocking from a senior engineer at Northrop. After I asked why he was never available on his work calendar, it turns out he time blocks his entire work calendar, and so nobody can ever make meetings with him, but he knows what he's doing every minute of every day. So there you go. And so the other, just to kind of dip into what it's like to work full-time as an engineer, a lot of the time people come to you with questions. They expect you to be completely self-managing your own workload a lot of the time. So they expect you to know what your current work capacity is. That means how much capacity do you have for extra tasks and things to do. So in order to evaluate that, you need to know what's currently on your plate. What program deliverable dates do you have? What are your due dates? What are your drop dead dates? How long do things take you to do? What is your program priority? That's usually dictated by a manager. But after a little while, all this can be like drinking from a fire hose. There are people throwing tasks at you all the time, and maybe they don't come from one consistent source. Maybe I personally report to maybe 4 different senior engineers, all of who are allowed to give me tasks. And the only stop gate on that is me saying, no, I can't do that right now, or yes, I can do it, but you're not going to get it for another 4 weeks. And so being able to have that level of self-management and that level of awareness is hugely valuable in the workplace, because they just expect you to do it. And it's not a sink or swim as that kind of portrays it, because there are people who are going to help you out. They expect you to have some time to adjust from being a student to being a full-time engineer. But at the same time, you're completely responsible for what your own workload is and for what you're delivering to other engineers. So you're responsible for the dates, for the quality of your work, and it comes down to they just expect it from you. And so learning these skills while you're still an undergrad is hugely valuable, and it'll save you a lot of belly aching later on once you're working full-time. And so to kind of carry on from that, getting an engineering job is about much more than technical skill. It's networking and past experience, but it's also personality and capability, and again, less tangible things like these type of soft skills. So I mean, a 4.0 looks great on a resume, but if you're completely antisocial, if nobody can work with you, if you never get anything done on time, if nobody knows what you're doing, your time at that company is probably very limited. So when it comes down to it, most people would rather work with a 3.0 who gets all their work done on time than a 4.0 who they can never find or who they absolutely hate working with. So it's kind of to give you a value, to these type of skills, where it's not always explicitly stated. And so, And it's also that ability, again, to self-manage. And another very valuable one, I think, is the drive to learn is actually a very important one that comes up at work a lot. So they don't want to hire engineers who just want to statically do the same thing for the rest of their life, who's going to work for about a year and then never grow or never learn how to do anything new. Because from that perspective, I guess if you want to put more of a technical term on it, your value is never really appreciating for the company. You're never going to learn anything new. You're never going to expand in your capacity, and that's not valuable to them. They definitely need workhorse engineers, but they want people who can be flexible, people who can learn to do new things, people who can grow. And that is a big thing that we look for, especially at Northrop Grumman, is people who want to learn how to do new things. And again, that's a soft skill that's not necessarily explicitly stated. So, excuse me. Oh, I'm running a little slow, but so I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about how I got hired at Northrop. So, kind of an odd story. I did get hired by applying online. I do not recommend that as a strategy, but it did happen to work out in my case. So I got hired, later on I went back and asked my employer, or my hiring manager, rather, why did you pick me? How did I come out of the crowd? And she said, well, we had several candidates with identical technical skills, but you had done a lot of CAD stuff especially, which happened to be applicable for the job. And also she said, you seemed really motivated, you were really driven, you seemed really excited when you were on the phone, and you clearly wanted to work with us, and you matched really well with a lot of the engineers that were interviewing you. So just that simple interchange of having a solid conversation with somebody about a non-technical topic, even that counted a significant amount in that interview. Even though they gave me a technical interview, even though they never sat down and said, tell me about your personality. That's what they're evaluating the entire time, because you're not just a unit with technical skills. You're a person who has to fit in with the personality and the social group that is an engineering environment, because you're always going to be working with other people. And so in order to facilitate that, managers are looking for people who will fit in with the environment that they've already established at their particular work site. So again, just pushing the value of these soft skills and social skills. So I think I'm running a little bit slow, but I did have a couple other just general social soft skills, as long as nobody has any other questions or comments going forward. Okay, so a couple topics that I'm going to touch on real quick is just managing relationships, setting goals, and then pathfinding while you're still an undergrad. So, jumping right in, managing relationships. This is, again, just basic social skills for school and the office. So most people will just describe this by a general blanket of networking, and I know there's been a lot of talks about that, and you guys will probably hear a lot more about it before you graduate. As always, network with people in order to find jobs, in order to get opportunities. But there are a couple sort of hard tasks that you can break out in order to kind of facilitate this a little bit further. The biggest one on here for me is just emailing people back. If professors send out an email to their class saying, hey, I've got this project going, if students are interested, email me back. Email them back that day. Don't wait a week, don't give kind of a half-hearted response. Just say, hey, I'm really interested, when can I drop by? Just replying to people consistently is actually a really big part of it. So that's something I really emphasize, is when people say, oh yeah, come talk to me, or get back to me, get back to people, follow up on that. And kind of on the tail end of that is keeping your appointments. If you say you're going to be somewhere at a specific time, be there. It can be hard because things come up, your work schedule gets busy, but if it's something as simple as, oh, I was hanging out on Reddit and I kind of stayed on there for 2 hours longer than I meant to, so I just bailed on that thing, but really just showing up for things and replying in meaningful amounts of time, it shows that one, you're consistent, you show up when you say you're going to show up, and two, you're dependable. If you show up when you say you're going to show up, people know that they can depend on you, and they know that they can count on you for things. And it's probably one of the easiest ways to build respect in a relationship or to elevate your level of responsibility on a project, is just be one of the people who shows up for things consistently. This is especially big on project teams because there's probably 20 people say they're going to show up, but it's really just the same 5 people who show up every single week. And those 5 people end up doing all of the work, they get all the responsibility, they do all the cool parts of the project because they show up. And that's a big part of it. And that all kind of segues into respecting other people's time, because once you start getting really deep into a time management, schedule intense thing like this, there are a lot of other people who are using methods like this too. So when you set appointments and then flake on them, you're also wasting their time because they blocked out time just for you, and now you've gone and wasted all that. So they have big holes in their schedule. It's really inconsiderate, and it's, like I said, it's disrespectful. So understanding that other people are doing this type of scheduling too, and that their time is a resource that they decided to give to you. So definitely, again, respect other people's time. So, I'm good on time. So this is setting goals. Again, these are all kind of general skills that you guys probably have heard a lot about from high school or various other lectures, but again, setting goals is important. It goes back to self-awareness and self-management. It's really old, tried and true topic, so I don't want to go into the strategies of goal setting, but just give you kind of a story for me. So I think we get this idea that setting goals needs to be this big overarching process, like I'm going to be an astronaut, so today I'm going to go and do this, and tomorrow I'm going to do this, and then in 10 years I'll be an astronaut. But goal setting doesn't have to be that intimidating or that broad. It can be something very specific. So when I was a freshman, I sat down and said, okay, while I'm an undergrad, I want to get an internship at a cool aerospace company. I want to join at least 2 clubs. I want to be an officer in a club at some point. I want to get a job working for a professor. I sat down and just wrote down like 4 or 5 things that I wanted to make sure I did while I was an undergrad. And just the act of writing these things down and making yourself aware of kind of like, oh yeah, these are a couple things that I want to make sure I do. Just giving yourself that level of awareness helps a lot when you're trying to be aware of opportunities. So you go, oh, I did say I wanted to be a club officer at some point. Oh, somebody emailed me saying that they were doing officer elections, or that they had some club that needed more people signing up. Maybe I'll go check out their GVM. I got to get this officer thing off my plate. So just writing down a couple basic things that you want to achieve at some point while you're an undergrad is huge and can help you out a lot. And still more on this topic, and this does kind of go back to the workplace, because goal setting is actually a very big corporate process as well. It's how they judge your performance on a year-to-year basis. So at the beginning of the year they say, okay, we want you to set 3 to 5 performance goals this year. These are things that are within your job title, but slightly above and beyond what you might normally consider your regular workflow. It could be something like, what were mine? So I had like an engagement goal, which was be a mentor to a junior member at the company. Something as simple as that, which mostly means, you find one of the interns who needs some help, and you give them advice on their projects, and you try and teach them some new stuff. And that's used as, a measuring stick by the corporation in order to see how you're progressing. And it's a chore that you have to do every couple months, very regularly throughout the company. So get used to it now, because it's not going away. So the last topic that I wanted to touch on, I'm almost out of slides, don't worry, is sort of pathfinding. And this is pulling back a little bit because I have a slightly different perspective, I think, because I've been out of school for a little bit now, and the biggest shock so far, honestly, is how short undergrad was. And it's about 4 years of school, and I'm going to spend the next 40 years of my life in the workplace. Maybe a couple years for graduate school or a couple more for PhD, but the majority of your adult life is going to be spent in the workplace. And so undergrad turns into this very, very narrow span where you can get a lot of stuff done. And so I think a lot of engineering students in particular, nice meeting you, a lot of us are focused just on surviving, getting through this week's amount of homework, maybe getting through next week's midterm. And so it becomes very much like you're focused on your tiny little piece of what your undergrad is going to be, and it makes it zip by super fast. And so it's taking that moment to pull back, and for me, like, time management helps a lot with that. but it's pulling back and taking the time to think about what you want to do, writing down a couple things that you want to achieve while you're in undergrad, so you can make sure that your entire school existence doesn't revolve around just doing homework. Because again, you only have a couple years and it's going to go really fast. And the biggest part of that is just being on the lookout for new opportunities. So for me, getting involved with the microgravity space program, it wasn't like an email I got. I just happened to know, I think Tassine mentioned Sam Avery. He was a guy I knew from some of my classes. We happened to work for the same professor a couple times. And he mentioned, oh yeah, you know, we need somebody who can do CAD on the team. And so I shot him an email. There's like a formal team application to get on that team and everything. Like, it's a very involved process to get involved on the research proposal. But since I remembered that Sam had done that, I said, oh, you know, I did a lot of CAD this summer, I bet I could help out. So I just shot him an email and said, hey, you know, if you want, I can do some CAD for your project or whatever. You know, I've got a little bit of time if you're into that. But that ends up snowballing hugely. Just because I shot him off one email, he said, oh, thank God, you know, I really need somebody who knows how to do this. You're on the team. And it was that simple to get involved. Next thing you know, we're designing an entire, you know, fuel injection system, and, you know, 8 months later we're on a plane doing zero gravity parabolas. So just keeping your ear to the ground, you know, keeping an eye on your relationships and being on the lookout for new opportunities is huge. So that's all I got. Thanks, guys.